Hey everybody, welcome back to Young Engineers of Today, and I hope you had a good weekend. Here we are, back in cybersecurity, going to continue along with it and, move on to the next part. Now, I just wanted to cover a couple of things real quick. First off, an update on the Dragon launch. It was successful. It was SpaceX's first used reusable rocket that took off and landed again. So that's a big deal. It's means that it raises the potential for spaceflight to become much, much cheaper. Launching things into space to become much, much cheaper. Again, because the biggest part of the cost of taking something up into space is the rocket and the fuel. But I just wanted to give you an update on that. So it is a successful mission. Woo, that's pretty awesome. Another thing happens earlier. New internet legislation. Well, rather, the removal of not yet implemented internet legislation happened earlier this week as well. As it stands right now, Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon can sell the browsing habits of their customers, i.e. people who use the internet like you and I. This is more or less how the case has been in the past. It was actually, there was going to be a piece of legislation coming through that would prevent them from being able to do that. But like I said, that was stricken down, removed before it came into effect, and this is the way it stands now. So yeah, technically speaking, it's, I suppose, sort of a good and a bad thing. Because we have, as a society, agreed to give up a lot of our personal information in exchange for many online services. This is part of the reason why things like Facebook and Google are free. This is actually the main reason why places like Facebook and Google are free. It does not cost them nothing to run all of this stuff. The trade-off that we've made is they just keep track of how we use these services and give that data to companies that are interested in it, customize the browsing experience, things like that. A lot of times you'll see if you're using the internet enough, you'll see ads on websites for things that you were searching for previously. Like, if you're looking for, I don't know, a new car or something like that, a lot of the ads on unrelated websites will start popping up for local dealerships and, Toyota and Honda and Mazda and Ford and GMC and all these things will start popping up on your, in the websites you visit. And that's sort of how the case has been for a while now. Who knows what direction that's going to go in the future? Who knows what happens with it? As it stands right now, it's a convenience thing, certainly, and it also allows these sites to be free for us to use. But then again, you have to be sort of mindful of what you do and where you go and things like that, and just sort of the idea that there is somebody out there who knows what you do when you go on the internet. So yeah, I think you guys are starting to sort of become into a situation where that will be something that you're a lot more cognizant of as you're growing up. That's not something that a lot of people in my generation or the generation before mine have really had to think about too much. I mean, we sort of do now, but this is starting to become something that we're aware of. You guys will be, um, becoming adults in an age where that will be another thing you'll have to think about. But yeah, so just it would, I suppose, behoove you to be aware of it. Anyway, last Wednesday we went over networks. We just got started on it, basically. It was very early on. We watched the history of the internet, which, if you guys remember, started as similar but different projects from several different organizations. You had DARPA, and you had a Science Institute, and you had a French company, and all these, and they all were developing at roughly the same time, similarly structured. Well, not even similarly structured, but with a similar point, but differently, executed. And they all sort of merged their efforts and created a standardized communication language between computers. Does anyone remember what that's called? You're all pretty familiar with it, I will say that much. Well, that's always existed, but how binary code can be interpreted can be different between computers as well. That's part of the problem we run into with different operating systems, is they're binary, each means different things. But there is a standardized language that computers use to communicate over the internet, specifically, that all computers can understand. Yeah, and then there are some letters before that too. So IP are the second two letters. What are the first three? Or the last two letters, I suppose. Does anybody remember TCP/IP? Um, that's our standardized language for computers to communicate with one another. That's why you can have a Windows computer and a Linux computer and a Macintosh computer or a Mac computer or whatever, an Apple computer, all on the same internet. They can all communicate with one another. Different versions of Windows can communicate with one another. Servers and clients and they can all communicate with one another thanks to TCP/IP. Even if they're just being a hop for a further destination. We went over the basic concepts of a network. This was incredibly sort of like a very top overview of you know what a network is. Even just in the basic definition, a network is just well, actually, let's move down to two or more connected devices that can share resources and or exchange data. The idea of a network is that they exchange data. They don't necessarily even have to do anything with the data, but the fact that they exchange data technically makes them a network. Um, so there's that. That's why you can have networks that exist in a fashion unrelated to computers, like friend networks. You guys exchange information, jokes, your life and stuff like that. It makes you kind of a network as well. So and sharing resources and things like that. So it's an interesting way to look at it, but yeah, there are similarities there. Then we went over nodes that are devices that are connected to the network. And two computers connected together is just referred to as a node-to-node connection. A link is the physical medium that connects the nodes. A hop is an intermediary pass of the message along to its destination. So a lot of times if you're getting from point A to point B, there are going to be a lot of nodes in between. And those nodes that you travel through in between are known as hops because they're not the starting point or the end destination, but the data still has to pass through them on the way to its destination. So they're a hop. They hop over that, to the next link and move on. Routing is the act of selecting paths in a network along which to send a message. So again, this is the act of finding how to get from point A to point B, much like manually sort of figuring out how you're going to drive to a friend's house or walk to a friend's house or something like that, based on your knowledge of the surrounding area. I can walk through this greenbelt path back here, and then I can go down this street and cross over here, and so on and so forth. IP address is a unique numerical label that allows other devices to locate a device on the network. So this is part of the Internet Protocol language feature, so that you have an IP address, which is like a mailing address. You can have multiple people living at the same address, but two people in different physical locations are not going to have the same address. Mailing addresses are unique to each house. Same deal with IP address. IP addresses are unique to each node. Now, keep in mind, confusingly, IP addresses can change when a computer connects to a network. Can change. They don't always, but they can. And because they can change each time, in fact, a computer connects to a network, there needs to be an address that doesn't change, which is the Media Access Control address, MAC address. And this is just like, so you personally can move around. You can live in house to house, but you have a name of your own. You can think of it like that. The IP address is the mailing address that you live in. The MAC address is your name. It's what identifies you as you. So whereas a device connected can change from node to node, thus having a different IP address, their MAC address will never change. We can figure out all this stuff, by the way, by opening up a console window and typing in these commands. Now, in Windows, ipconfig/all will give you the network information. ifconfig will definitely work in Mac and Linux. ifconfig, it's debatable if it'll work on PC. I haven't actually tried that, but I do know that ipconfig will give you this window right here, or this info dump. And I know that ifconfig will do a very similar thing in Mac and Linux. So yeah, you go ahead and enter that in on your computer. I'm not going to do it because my screen is currently being recorded, and I don't want to put that information out there on the internet. But if you ever want to open up the terminal or something like that on Windows, and you're running Windows 8.1 like I am, you can just right-click on it and open up the command prompt. If you have administrator access, you can open up command prompt admin. Otherwise, you can just open up regular command prompt. And yeah, so as you can see here, you'll get your MAC address, you'll get your IP address, and you'll get your DNS address. DNS is like the domain name service. Yeah, domain name service. I've skipped over that one accidentally. So DNS is the domain name service, which will, when basically given like a website address, will return it the IP address that that your computer needs to know in order to be able to get there. So like looking up somebody in the phone book almost, and getting their living address in order to figure out how to get there. So yeah, the server is a computer or program that provides specific services on a network. So an email server directs emails, a web server serves web pages, a host is just any computer called to a network or connected to a network. Servers are specific programs that run on hosts that do these things. So like a server, an email server is a program on a computer. Uh, a web server is a program on a computer. A lot of times we kind of make the two synonymous, so like we could refer to a server as a computer as well, mostly just because those computers don't really run any other programs. They spend their entire time running, an email server or a web server or something like that. Local area network, group of computers within a distinct area, such as a school or a study building, or office building, excuse me. Then we got Tim Berners-Lee, who was the guy who basically invented the World Wide Web, which is a user interface for the internet. It allows us to very easily look at different aspects of the internet and share information that way. So like this quote here says, the internet makes info available via a global computer network, and the web makes that info easy to read. We store a whole bunch of info on the internet, and the web just makes it easier for us to view that information. And that's where we got. Here's this cyberspace as an internet metaphor video. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you guys the link for it. It's, I believe, TED Talk? I couldn't tell you entirely. I can't remember. But I'm going to go ahead and set it out. I'm going to watch it and mute it. And then just go ahead and raise your hands when you guys are done with it as well, and we'll move on to the next thing. that ended rather abruptly. But yes, there is a lot of physical components that go into making the internet global and working worldwide. Why is this up here? Oh. Yeah, I'm sure it is. It's probably too long of a video to go over during class, but you can always look up What is the Internet Really by Andrew Bloom and get the video on the TED website or the TED channel on YouTube. So that's there just so you know. It's just, that alone is probably going to be a little bit too long for the scope of this class. Yeah, you can if you want to. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to really be interrupting anybody. But as it stands right now, that it ended fairly abruptly anyways. Soft-spoken person. Anyway. But yeah, so if you want to watch the whole thing, it is available on the TED Talk website as well as the TED channel on YouTube. It is out there. It's just this wasn't the full length of the video, which is fine because the full length of the video would have probably been pretty long. So now we already know how to get an IP address. ipconfig/all if you're on Windows, ifconfig if you're on Mac or Linux. You get this information. If you have any other computers on your network, you can look up the IP address of that computer on your network as well. It's going to have a very similar IP address to yours, and it should also be listed on this on this list, or if you do like NetView or something like that in Windows, you should be able to get it as well. Now, there's a very simple command, ping, and this exists in, well, all three operating systems in the terminal, and it exists as a way to just do a very simple diagnostic test of your connection. So a ping, in layman's terms, well, it comes from things like radar and sonar and stuff like that. It's where you send out some sort of packet of data and you get a response back. The reason why it's, I think, called a ping is because of sonar. You would get a ping when the sonar bounced back because it hit something. A data ping is a similar thing. When you talk about ping and you say, you measure ping in milliseconds generally, if everything is working okay, and that's just a round trip journey for something like a packet of data. It might send just like 4 bytes of data or something like that to the destination that you're looking for, and then that destination will send those 4 bytes of data back to you, and that whole trip is ping. You can use this command to test whether or not you're connected to something. If you wanted to, like you could test and see if your whole internet is down, like if you don't have connection to the internet, or if you just can't connect to a specific website by testing ping out on a few different things. You can test ping out on things in your own network as well, and friends' network if you have their IP address and stuff like that. You can ping basically anything. But yeah, you can ping another computer on a network or on a different network using the IP addresses of whatever you want to ping, just to get a response back. Like, for instance, if I were to, I could do something like ping Google, and here I get this response. Pinging google.com, 216.58.217.78 with 32 bytes of data. And then I get a reply back, 32 bytes. It's not 4 bytes, it's 32 bytes. 32 bytes, 32 bytes, 32 bytes, 32 bytes each time, so I'm not getting any data loss. And then here is my how long it takes to travel, and then how long it takes to get back. Yeah. This is pinging. Yeah, you can ping yourself by typing 127.0.0.1. So if I go bam, look at that, less than 1 millisecond. Of course, because I'm pinging myself, so all it's doing is it's just moving stuff along the network protocols on the motherboard to the CPU and then back, and that's it. Then you can also, if you ipconfig, you'll get the address of your router, which is listed under default gateway, and you can ping that. You can ping your router and get a response back from your router. So basically, ping is just how long it takes for something to travel. The smaller the time, the faster the travel, the better response you're going to have, just the better in general. So if you're, doing something like playing an online game or something like that, you want your ping to be as low as possible. It is still pretty amazing to think, though, that we can measure our connection time to places around the world in milliseconds. That is a very recent phenomenon. And that's just thanks to the fact that we can now communicate at literally the speed of light to different places in the world. Now, this isn't always going to be the case. You're going to find that some continents and stuff like that are going to have bigger issues with being able to communicate around the world. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's not necessarily that it's not a physics limitation at that point, insofar as it's not, light is still very fast. We could still have a very fast connection to anywhere in the world, but we run into an issue where the cables, those little undersea cables like that guy had in his video, Edward Bloom, I believe, like he had in his video, they're sending enough data through at the same time that yours kind of has to wait its turn. And it has to go through maybe more routing stations than normal, that sort of thing. You maybe don't have a direct connection to the place in the world that you want to communicate with. So you'll have to, like, let's say, for instance, just speaking theoretically, you're in Australia and you try and communicate to somebody in Europe. Your data packet might have to get routed up through Japan and then over to China and then across Asia, or it might have to get routed up through Japan and then across the Pacific through to North America and then through North America over to wherever you want to go in England, or excuse me, Europe. So you're not always going to get a 100% efficient travel time. There's limitations on that just because of the fact that we still have to set up physical links between different continents. And we do those with, like it was explained in the video, with thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of cable. It's actually a pretty ridiculous engineering feat when you think about it. The fact that we have laid cable at the bottom of the ocean that is long enough to go across the entire ocean, and that is how we've connected things. If you ever wondered how we're able to communicate with somebody in another continent, that is how. It is because we have laid a cable. It is like, the whole cup and string thing where you hook up a cup to a string and then a cup on the other end, and you can talk into the cup, and whoever's on the other side, the vibrations pass through the string and get amplified in the cup, and they can hear you. And there's always that old, you don't really see it much anymore, but there's always that old stereotype or trope or something like that in movies where two kids in a suburban neighborhood, like who are neighbors, they have a cup and a string running from one house to the other, and that's how they communicate with one another, that kind of thing. That's basically what we're doing, except just across an entire ocean. Imagine you have a cup and a string, and it goes across the entire ocean. And that's essentially what's going on there. So that's pretty ridiculous. So anyway, on to cybersecurity. Now that we've done all of that, let's get down to the main course of what we're going over. So cyberspace is a term used to refer to items within the communication network. For example, a website, an email, or an online game all exist in cyberspace. It is that metaphorical place that exists where all of our internet stuff lives. That is cyberspace. So, if you ever read anything cyberpunk or anything like that, like the people can put on like special goggles and gloves and stuff like that, and then go into cyberspace and have an avatar and go do cyberspace stuff, like hack into the whatever. That's taking the metaphor a bit more literally than it's actually meant to. But regardless, cyberspace is the location, the non-physical location that exists where basically our internet resides. It is the flow of digital information across interconnected computers. Cyberspace is both very real in its effects and yet not real in a tangible sense. So there you go. So cyberspace is the place where a telephone conversation appears to occur, not inside your actual phone, the plastic device on your desk, not inside the other person's phone in some other city. It's the place between the phones. So cyberspace is where basically your voice travels through in order to get to somebody's phone on the other end. There is still no substance to cyberspace, nothing you can handle. It has a strange kind of physicality now. It makes good sense today to talk of cyberspace as a place all of its own because it has so much of a tangible effect on our lives, our physical lives, without actually being a physical location. And that's not necessarily an unusual phenomenon. I mean, ideas don't have a weight, don't have a physicality to them, but they affect our physical lives in so many ways. Think about the idea of a country. At its base, a country is really nothing more than an idea. It's an idea, though, that we ascribe to a physical location and b a concrete thing. For as long as you've existed, for as long as I've existed, for as long as my grandparents have existed, America, like the U.S., has been a physical place. So in that sense, it's a little bit different from cyberspace, but there is a mental aspect to it that cannot be that is distinct from the physical location. Think about the idea of America. What Americans represent. What it means to you to be an American. The sort of feeling of difference you might think when you think of somebody who's from a different country, that sort of thing, because they come from a different country. Even though they are technically coming from a different geographical location, I mean, they're still a person. And in fact, you can find people from other countries who are, very similar in temperament and personality to you. It's not like you're really only going to find American friends just because that you're both American, so you're going to have like a similar interests and things like that, it tends to be a good place to start because they're close. But you could find your best friend in the whole world could be, halfway across the world, at some point in your life. And the idea of difference comes from the idea of countries. Anyway, I'm starting to muddle my point here, but the whole point of what I'm trying to say is the fact that cyberspace is not physical, yet it affects our physical lives in a very real way, is not necessarily a new idea either. We got some layers of cyberspace here, which is pretty cool. We got a physical layer, which is the geographic components. So basically, the relays, the substations, the cables, things like that. The logical layer, which is the logical network components. So you've got the physical network components, which exist on top of the geographic components. Physical network components are affected by the geographic components. You place landing stations on the coast because that really makes the most sense. You place cables in places where the ocean isn't as deep and the connection isn't as long between continents because that saves you money and time. You place repeaters at certain distances along the ocean floor, but also you have to take into consideration the fact that there's going to be some places where even though it's an ideal location distance-wise to place a repeater, it's not an ideal location geographically to place a repeater, so you don't, and you move a little bit further, or you place a little bit earlier. So the physical network components can be affected by the geographic components, which is literally just how the Earth is laid out. Then you've got the logical network components, which go on top of the physical network components, and that's how everything is sort of routed around a network. So we've got the physical network components like the landing stations and the switching stations and things like that. Then the logical network components, you might place, house your server program in a particular set of physical network components because that would make the most sense. You might have a Google server that exists in an area where there are a lot of other servers, and those servers exist there because it makes sense geographically, and so on and so forth. Then you've got the persona components, which is the social layer, which is where the start of the social layer, which is where the people interact with the logical network components, so where we interact with our computers and things like that, and communicate with one another and things like that. And then you've got the cyber persona components, which is an interesting idea because think about how you act online and think about how you act in person. They could be very similar. They could be very different. But there's usually at least some difference to them. There is some conscious decision to do something online that you wouldn't do. Yeah, I'm not surprised, Liam. There is some conscious decision you make online to do something that is different from how you would handle it in person. And, without any commentary as to what that could be, these things still exist. Maybe you'll engage in a conversation with somebody that you wouldn't normally. Maybe you'll, I don't know, maybe you'll create some sort of caricature of yourself that runs around doing ridiculous stuff and just sort of maybe brightening people's day. Who knows? But it's not generally like the person that you would act like in person. That is your cyber persona. Pretty much everybody has one. There's always a cyber persona, even when it's stuff like Facebook and things like that, where it's very clearly linked to you as a physical persona, like you're you. You still have a cyber persona there. I know there are people on Facebook who tend to be, a lot more forthcoming about their opinions and things like that, as opposed to in person. On top of that, there's a very well-known phenomenon that people tend to post the best of their life on Facebook. They make their life look a lot better maybe than it even actually is. Maybe not intentionally, just because they're only posting the things that are super exciting and stuff like that. But the impression that comes across is that their life is maybe a lot more exciting or a lot more interesting or a lot, a lot more whatever than it actually is. And the cyber persona plays into that as well. Now, problem. Cyberspace and its underlying infrastructure are vulnerable to a wide range of risk, stemming from both physical and cyber threats and hazards. Cyberspace is particularly difficult to secure due to a number of factors. One, there is the ability of malicious actors to operate from anywhere in the world. It can be pretty easy to defend a building because it has a very specific geographic location, and you just have to make sure that the surrounding geographic locations are clear, and then the building's pretty much in good shape. However, you can be operating a website out of San Francisco and somebody in, somewhere in the Ukraine can mess with it. And in that sense, there's literally no restriction on where an attack can come from, which makes it sound a lot more dramatic than I mean it to, but anyway. The linkages between cyberspace and physical systems, just because they could be working out of a computer, they could be working out of a station. They could hack into your website. They could deal damage to the one of those buildings that holds a bajillion different servers. A fire could happen in that building, just unrelated, and it could destroy the server, thus bringing your service down. That sort of thing. The difficulty of reducing vulnerabilities and consequences in complex cyber networks. Again, because so many things can happen from so many different angles, it can be hard to isolate them and make sure that they don't happen, because there are a whole bunch of different things that you'd have to do. And just to get an idea of, how complex this can be, this is sort of how your computer can be connected to the internet, or a set of computers can be connected to the internet. And we'll actually spend some time going over this on Wednesday, just because there's a lot going on here, and I want to make sure that that we understand it before, we move on, because it sort of emphasizes point 3 here, and the complexity of these networks. Because technically speaking, depending upon the method, any one of these things could be a theoretical entry point. Well, not any one of these things, but most of these things. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call it a class right now. We'll go ahead and do the poll questions, and then we'll leave it open for question and answer time. And then, if you don't have any questions, you can head out and have a wonderful couple of days, and we'll see you on Wednesday.